9 seconds. Decide your fate.
What did you do back home?
Because of these people, I'm beginning to understand real peace.
Roberto!
Me comes.
You should stay out of other people's business.
Seem like a man who understands violence.
The movie opens in Sicily, Italy. Lorenzo Vitali, an Italian crime lord, drives through distant farmlands with his son in the passenger seat. As they approach a winery, he spots lifeless bodies scattered around. He parks, sees one of his men visibly distressed outside, and tells his son to stay in the car. With his pistol ready, Lorenzo approaches the scene. His man, too shaken to speak, stands in shock.
Mi ha detto di aspettare fuori.
Lorenzo walks inside and finds his men brutally slaughtered, with blood and broken glass covering the hallways. Even someone as hardened as Lorenzo is rattled by the carnage. He reaches the basement, where more bodies lie, and finally comes face to face with the man of the hour, Robert, held at gunpoint by his men. Robert explains that Lorenzo's men refused him entry into the building, and he wasn't pleased. Lorenzo doubts Robert acted alone, but Robert calmly responds, "You shouldn't have taken something that wasn't yours." He gives Lorenzo 9 seconds to decide his fate.
That's what you have to decide your fate. 9 seconds.
But when Lorenzo fails to answer, Robert grabs the enemy's gun, kills 2 of his men, and uses the third as a human shield before firing a shot at Lorenzo. Robert forces the crime boss to cry as he crawls for safety. Leaning against a wall, Robert ends the man's life. Robert grabs a key from him, heads outside, and instructs the kid to stay seated until help arrives. As Robert turns around, a gunshot is fired, startling the kid and scaring him off. Injured, Robert sits on the ground, and the scene shifts to a police car finding him passed out in his car by the roadside. In bad shape, Robert is taken by a local officer to the town's doctor, Enzo, to avoid the hospital reporting the bullet wound. After the operation, Enzo asks whether Robert saved a good or bad man, and Robert barely manages to say he doesn't know.
I don't know, none knows.
Over the next few days, Enzo cares for him, putting Robert in his bed. Once Robert regains enough strength, he walks with a cane, and Enzo tells him he's been out for 3 days, encouraging him to go for a walk. Robert does just that, strolling down the street past several shops. He eventually stops at a cafe and carefully arranges tissues in front of him. A woman named Amina comes out shortly and places coffee on the tissues. The officer who saved his life then appears with his daughter and introduces himself as Gio Benucci, and his daughter is Gabriella. She walks off and Gio tells Robert that he had a nasty fall, and Robert gets the idea. The officer gives McCall his car keys and says he didn't look at the bags inside the car either. He bids him farewell and takes off.
I didn't look in your bags.
The scene shifts to CIA base of operations where a woman by the name of Collins picks up a phone. Robert begins giving the coordinates to the winery he was just at. She asks who he is, and when he says concerned citizen, she ends the call.
Collins, who is this?
Concerned citizen.
No one is supposed to know that this is CIA location, and Robert calls once again. This time he tells Collins the location, and that she might want to send a squad up to check out exactly what's on site. She goes to write down the coordinates, and he informs her that their conversation is already recorded and ends the call. Collins pulls up a satellite feed of the location and calls in some OPS to check it out.
Yeah, I have a potential op situation.
Robert takes it upon himself to get friendly with some locals, and as he is still unwell, takes a seat on some stairs. That night he remembers exactly what happened in the winery. It is shown to us exactly how he took out men one by one with little to no effort, but he doesn't even recognize himself at this point. The following day, he finds himself having some lunch at the cafe when a man walks into the shop and takes an envelope from the owner. McCall watches him hand it to some bikers, and Amina comes over with some coffee and introduces herself to him. Over the next few days, he seems to be getting quite friendly with the locals, but yet again he sees the bikers collecting more protection money from shops. One shop owner by the name of Angelo is speaking to Marco Carana, the brother of the leader of the Mafia. It seems he doesn't have the funds to pay the Mafia as business was quite slow that week. This results in him getting a mad belting as Robert stands outside and listens to this take place. Marco expects double next week, and outside, he is met with the scariest stare in history. The scene shifts to Naples. We see the bikers travel from street to ST until they finally reach some apartments. Marco's brother Vincent seems to be having a meeting with the owners of the place and wishes to purchase the property. They tell him no, and he simply walks out and greets his brother outside. Behind him, a man crashes through a window hinting that you can't say no to Vincent. He tells his brother to get more money from the townspeople as he has some big plans prepared. The following day, Robert goes down to Angelo's shop to grab some fish for Enzo. Business seems as per usual, and they laugh at his new hat. Angelo refuses to take money off Robert.
What kind of fish you like?
Fish, I like three.
Later, Robert's call to the CIA allowed their teams to gain access to the winery. They find pills that are synthetic amphetamine. Then we see the piles of cash and drugs, over $11 million worth of cash, and a lot more worth of weapons and drugs. Frank, the supervisor, says this is a very high-level bust, and it was not even on their radar. Frank tells Collins to find out who made that call.
How'd you hear about this?
Call in, Anonymous.
Later on, Enzo checks Robert's wound and says he's almost back to normal. Robert then asks Enzo why he took care of and didn't call the police. Enzo says because when he asked him the question if he's a good or bad man, Robert said he doesn't know and only a good man would have said that.
Yeah, am I a good man or bad man? You ask me.
Elsewhere, Vincent tells his brother that he will have more work to do, but he reveals his plans to commercialize the town of Altamont with state-of-the-art casinos and resorts. Back at Enzo's house, Robert packs his bags and is ready to go back to the States. On his way out, he hears screaming and everyone running towards Angelo's shop. It's on fire, and Angelo screams as his livelihood is burning down before his eyes. Rizzo settles him and his wife down, and Robert sees this happening and turns around to find Marco and his crew watching from afar. The next day, Robert and the townspeople band together and help Angelo get his shop up and running. In the meantime, Gio is at the station and finds the vehicle responsible for the fire and calls in an investigation unit. That night, Robert grabs a coffee, and Amina tells him, let's get some food.
Would love to show you the real food of Altamonte.
They go for a walk and grab one juicy kebab together. As time passes in the town, Robert seems to have a soft spot for it and its people. He enjoys their theater and especially their coffee. Collins tries to take a hidden picture, and he says to take a better photo. She approaches him, and he says you're welcome for the tip. She's a bit snarky, and he becomes rhetorical with her. She says she could take him in, but he laughs as she has no jurisdiction. She elaborates on the dead bodies and questions if it was him. He laughs and says he is just a bystander and is too old to kill. His charisma seems to have made her giggle, and with that, she tells him to stick around and walks off.
Stick around. We're just getting started.
Elsewhere, Gio is picking his daughter up from school when he receives a call. They tell him they have his daughter and stop messing about in their business. Gio can't seem to find her and goes sprinting towards his house. Inside, he finds men kicking back in his house as if it's theirs. His family is being held up, and they tell Gio to drop the investigation or else his daughter will be eating for dinner. He takes a trip to Enzo, and Robert sees his black eye and asks Enzo what happened.
What happened to Joe?
He fell.
McCall then begins training, and during this, he finds Collins awaiting his arrival. She tells him that he's a ghost and is no longer a person of interest, just an interesting person. She also tells him about Vincent and his Mafia and wants to know why he chose to call her of all people. He replies by saying, why Italy? It has one of the most secure ports in the world. It's not the ideal place to launch such an operation.
Why smuggle drugs into the most secure port in the entire region?
Later that night, Officer Gio is eating dinner with his family. Unexpectedly, they get some uninvited guests who join their table. Marco starts asking Gio for favors and tells him he's going to work for him now. Marco sees Robert eyeing him out and walks towards his table. He tells him to stop messing himself in other people's business. Robert then replies by telling Marco that it is pure coincidence he is still in Sicily and that Marco messed up. He and his men find it amusing that an old man is challenging them. But Robert isn't playing and distracts Marco long enough to grab his arm before breaking his wrist. He forces Marco's men to stay put and makes Marco a humiliated joke in front of everyone at the restaurant. He forces the other assailants to leave the diner and then places Marco's gun on the table and makes him walk away like a little puppy. But the humiliated man isn't too happy and tells his men to get the van ready for another fire. He begins fuming and tells his man, named the Viking, that he's going to kill everyone in that shop, starting with Robert. Out of nowhere, their van crashes into one of his men and connects him to a wall. Everyone inside the van is dead, and Robert whacks the Viking to sleep. Marco pulls a knife on him, but within a few seconds, he is butchered and killed by a pissed-off McCall. He walks away as if nothing ever happened. The next day, police swarm the crime scene, and guess who's quite happy to see Macro dead? But it turns out that the same pills in the winery made their way into Marco's van. Meanwhile, a phone call makes Collins awake. It's Frank informing her of a major terrorist attack in Rome. The drugs appear to have financed this attack. Confused, Collins questions the logic. Why bring the drugs through Italy's most secure port? She suggests to Frank that Naples, being a more vulnerable entry point, might be their lead. She promises to gather information to track down the drug wholesalers.
Running drugs through the most secure port in the region.
Collins promptly approaches the chief of police, demanding to question anyone linked to the Kimura or Italian Mafia. She presents him with a file, and after reviewing it, he grants her access to interview all but one person. Ironically, that's the first person she decides to converse with. The man asks her what she's offering. Collins replies, "No deals, just an opportunity." Persuaded, he divulges details about the location of the wholesale supplier. Armed with this information, the police stormed the premises, and in the ensuing chaos, several individuals were fatally shot. Elsewhere at Vincent's residence, a somber gathering commemorates his younger brother's life. Amidst the mourners, the chief of police arrives, extending his sympathies to Vincent. In a hushed tone, he informs Vincent of the CIA presence in the city, inquiring about mafia ties within the government. He advises Vincent to halt all illicit activities, hinting that Collins is close to uncovering the Kimura's strategy of trading with rivals to boost their enterprise. He wishes to go back to being a proper chief of police and refuses to work for Vincent any longer. Enraged by the audacity, Vincent retaliates by severing the chief's hand fiercely, warning him to concentrate on avenging Marco's death instead. Elsewhere in the city, Collins' phone rings. It's Robert. His voice is urgent as he reveals that Kimura is orchestrating all of this, from the bombings to the drug operations. Then boom. The bomb that was meant for her didn't finish the job as she was just outside its lethal radius. Severely injured but alive, she was swiftly transported to a nearby hospital. Admitted into intensive care, a resolute Frank stands by her side, vowing to get down to the bottom of this mess. The scene cuts to an entourage transporting Vincent through Sicily. As he finally arrives at the town where Robert is located with Gio as a hostage, he yells at the top of his lungs for everyone to come out. As they do so, he tells them to bring his brother's killer before them, or he'll start shooting people at will. Robert's voice is then heard from a distance, and he is told to reveal himself.
I killed your brother.
You're a long way from home.
He tells Vincent that he killed his brother, but it was his fault for not listening. He reveals himself from the shadows with dual-wield guns that are not loaded. Vincent says he can take as he pleases from these people, but Robert instead tells him to take him as a prisoner, but just don't kill him in front of the good people. Vincent says this is the best place, as they will all learn a lesson not to interfere with him ever again. Robert surrenders and raises his hands as Vincent clocks his gun and bangs. Turns out it was Enzo firing, and the rest of the villagers see Robert as their own and begin filming Vincent with all their cameras, as it would cause too much heat for Vincent to kill Robert in front of so many phones. He tells him that he'll be back, and Robert says he'll be waiting. The Mafia then jump in their cars and take off. Later that evening, Vincent tells his crew to get ready for the next day. He's planning to make the town a war scene after he's done with it. As time passes and a thunderstorm bruises, Vincent sleeps in his bed while his men are outside guarding the house. One of Vincent's supercars begins beeping, and the guard at the gate goes to have a look. Everything seems to be ordinary, and he drops his gun and begins walking off. Robert grabs the man from behind and kills him with the gate open. He makes his way inside the property and kills another guard with a silencer. Another 3 men are playing cards, and the lights cut out. Robert, with 3 bullets, takes out all 3 guards. He then grabs a metal rod and takes out the man. Watching the cameras, as Vincent sleeps, he feels some water on his head. He turns around to find out it's blood. His ceiling then caves in on him, and his man falls through it. Vincent then grabs a gun and walks through the glass barefoot. He screams for his men's support, but no one can help him anymore. He begins spraying his automatic all around and proceeds to walk into the next room and is smacked out by Robert. He wakes up tied with a metal rope. He begins frothing, and Robert tells him he's got 6 minutes until he dies from the pills he gave him while he was knocked out. Vincent is then released and begins trying to make his escape. He falls and vomits continuously as Robert just stands behind him and tells him this is what you deserve. For all the innocents he killed, he will suffer the same fate. He even gets whacked by a car. He continues crawling on the ground, and Robert walks over him like he's a puppy. Humiliated and disgraced, he comes to a stop and breathes. It's his last breath, and once again, Robert walks away as if nothing ever happened. The city is abuzz as members of the Kimura are apprehended in a series of coordinated raids. At the hospital, Robert visits Collins, who thanks him for saving her life. As he places bags of cash on her bedside table, he mentions Marco, a man who lost his pension in a cyber attack. Collins pieces together the puzzle. Robert had traced the cyber attack to a winery in Sicily and dealt with all of Lorenzo's henchmen, including Lorenzo himself, secured the vault keys, and then took the exact amount owed to Marco. When she inquires about Marco's relationship to Robert, he reveals they'd met only once. Upon her departure from Italy, Collins travels to Boston to deliver the money to Marco and his wife. Overwhelmed with gratitude and on the verge of losing their home, the couple is puzzled by Collins' generosity. As she departs, Collins admits she too is curious about the depth of the connection. Back at the CIA, Collins receives an unexpected parcel, her mother's diary, and a note from Robert. The diary unveils as a shocking truth. Collins is the offspring of Brian and Susan Plummer. The film concludes in the festive streets of Altamont, where townsfolk jubilantly celebrate their football team's victory. Among the revelers, Robert blends in, immersing himself as one of the locals. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and press the bell icon for more amazing videos. See you next time.